I love that login sound. Good morning. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. It's Ken Van Dyne. I lead the Ubuntu Desktop team. Welcome to our first ever Indaba. For those of you that might not have read the announcement post, Indaba is South African for a conference between important people, which I think is very fitting for this. We want to start doing these a little more often, a little more live communication, a little more opportunity to interact with our users and community, and hopefully get more people involved. So let's kick this off with a brief round of introductions. Again, Ken Van Dyne. I lead the desktop team as well as the community team here at Canonical. Reese?
I'm Reese Davis. I am a developer advocate for Canonical and Ubuntu on the community team. Frederick?
Yeah, I'm Frederick. I'm a community member of Ubuntu, so I'm part of the Yaru team, and I make some stuff of the theme.
Great, thanks. Heather?
I'm Heather Ellsworth. I'm on the desktop team. I do kind of lots of things all over the place, like work on LibreOffice and work with Ken on the community side. And so, yeah.
Hey, Marco. I'm a Gnome and a Ubuntu developer, so on the desktop team of Canonical, and I also do mostly work related to the shell and the interface.
So I'm Ian, also on the desktop team. Been on the team for going up to 9 years now. Work on many areas of the desktop. I also work on the Ubuntu release team. So if any of you downloaded Suite, which came out yesterday, I was involved in the release there, and also Debian developer. So do a lot of work on the Debian project as well.
Great, thank you. So we actually chose today for our first Indaba because it's the day after release. I mean, obviously this week has been crazy busy for some people, especially Lainey there on the release team, getting images tested and out the door. There's a lot involved with that release. So we wanted to do it after the release, and today's usually a little bit of a day to kind of catch our breath and enjoy what we just got out the door. Lainey, you want to tell us a little bit about 2104?
Yep. So this is an interim release. So the thing to note is that we have two kinds of releases in Ubuntu. We have LTS releases and then non-LTS releases. So we have one LTS every 2 years. The next one of those will be in a year's time, April next year. So it means that we're sort of able to try out changes which maybe a bit more experimental, or maybe introduce new things, knowing that the release is not going to be kind of in support used by users for as long as an LTS release. So with that in mind, there's a few changes that I wanted to highlight in Ubuntu Desktop Pursuit Hippo. The first one is Active Directory support. So the desktop team developed better integration with Active Directory. So now, for example, you can join an Active Directory domain directly from the Ubuntu installer, which you couldn't do up until now. It's really something that we've been hearing a lot about from our kind of customers and partners at Canonical, that lots of enterprises use Active Directory, and they were really keen to see improved support in Ubuntu for that. So that's something that we've delivered in this interim release. We're able to test it out, and then we'll be looking at how to bring it back to Focal once it's stabilized and we've got some feedback there. The other big change which desktop users might have noticed is that we've switched from Xorg to Wayland as the default display server, which is kind of where a lot of the attention of desktop developers in the Gnome project and other desktop projects are these days. So Xorg it's got some kind of design problems and security problems that really is hard to fix, and Wayland addresses a lot of those problems. So we've made that switch now. It's fair to say we were kind of conservative with that. Other distributions made the switch a long time ago. So thank you for everyone upstream who's worked on developing Wayland and stabilizing it and putting a great base for us to kind of leap onto here. We'd be interested to hear everyone's feedback in that, of course. And the other thing to highlight, which I'll hand over to Frederick to talk about, is some really nice changes to the Yaru theme, which is our default theme in Ubuntu. maybe I'll just move over to Frederick and he can tell you the important big changes there.
Yeah, all right. We didn't change that much, so it's still based on the upstream themes, like both GNOME themes, GTK application themes, and GNOME shell theme. And but we worked a little bit on the dark theme, so it's a little bit better visible against the background. So the contrast should be better now, and yeah, we also try to figure out how we work out the dark theme situation, like stuff that you know from other operating systems like Android or iOS, where you have a global dark theme toggle. And we discussed a little bit what would be the best option, and we came to the conclusion that if you change the application themes via GNOME Control Center, that would be great. That if the shell would stay dark, so it's kind of a trade-off. Like you need to either you work at the evening and you have your application themes covered in dark colors, and when you open up the 2004 or 2010 shell, you would be brightened or like with a bright pop-up. But the same situation is basically if you work at the day and you open up a dark pop-up. So I think now we settle down to the dark shell because it's less annoying to have a dark pop-up on a bright theme. So it's still visible, and yeah, that's about it. We also made all colors a little bit more vibrant, so a little bit more fitting to the Ubuntu brand color scheme. Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, we obviously love the Yaru theme. Great work on that. It's really nicely polished for 2104. Thank you for that. Frederick's also been leading the way on the Yaru Dart package that we have, which brings the Yaru color scheme to Flutter applications. So he's been doing a great job there. So now you can easily create Flutter apps that have that Yaru style, which we love, of course. So speaking of theming questions, let's show this one here. Here's one for you, Frederick. Any thoughts on this one?
New link tab with a bright white background. Oh, I actually need to check this one. I don't. What's a new link tab? Could anyone help me? I don't know what.
I think this might be about when you press the plus button to open a new tab and you get a blank screen. It's about the color of the background there, I think.
Ah, yeah, that's a Firefox problem. They fixed this in the new when you use the beta Firefox. Of course, I'm using the Snap, so I'm using the beta version, and this is fixed. I think they fixed it in the Proton UI. If I think he means that, yeah, it's fixed, but it's a Firefox. It was a Firefox issue, and they fixed it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is fixed. Actually, I just checked that. Cool. All right, thank you there. Let's go to a question. So thank you everybody for submitting some questions up front. Please ask questions here in the chat. We will kind of try to answer those as best we can on air. But we have some questions that were answered both on the Discourse thread as well as the Ubuntu Hideout Discord server. The folks over there were kind enough to create an Indaba channel to allow people to post questions, which was awesome. We had a great bit of questions there. Let me read the first one here. I think is good for Lainey to answer maybe. Daniel asked, there used to be a large amount of community focus on the desktop artwork, wallpapers and songs, etc., and tilde music. for a fresh installation. It would be great to see more of this. Are there plans to involve community artists?
Yeah, it's fair to say that we haven't run a wallpaper contest for a couple of cycles, right? We used to have various people have run them over the time that Ubuntu's been around, but yeah, that kind of fell away. But the community, I think this is fair to say, correct me if I'm wrong, Ken, but the community team is planning to revive the wallpaper contest for the upcoming 2110 cycle. So I think you can expect to see that again. And yeah, like the questioner mentioned, there are other areas where it's maybe possible to have some community involvement. So we used to have something called the Ubuntu Free Culture Showcase in our Ubuntu Desktop releases in the past. So that was some videos and some music which members of the community had made and released under free licenses, which was really, really great. But we never sort of refreshed them over time, and they became kind of old. So I think we decided to remove them. But I think personally it would be great to see those kind of community contributions from creative people in our community. Have people given the option to have something which comes with Ubuntu by default. I think that would be amazing. So yeah, I believe there are plans, and look out on Discourse for them coming out in the course of the cycle.
Yeah, bringing the free culture showcase back, I think would be excellent. I'd love to see that. So we should definitely talk about that. Thanks for the question. Got another one here from. Oh wait, sorry, wrong one. From Andrew Hazen. Was 2204 LTS likely to use pulse audio or Pipewire for audio? This is a really good question. We were just talking about this recently. I think we are going to look to switch to Pipewire, perhaps for 2110 even. We like to make changes like this in an interim release, not in the LTS. So we definitely would like to, if we're going to switch to it, we want to try it in 2110 before we get to 2204, just in case we decide that it's really not suitable. But I think we probably should try to take that leap. So we're definitely going to look into it. No firm decisions have been made yet. All right, let's go to another question that we had gotten in advance. Give me a second here. So Dyson Hoover on Ubuntu Hideout Discord asked, will there ever be an official Ubuntu spin with a standalone window manager like i3 Gaps, BSPWM, never even heard of that one, Xmonad, Qtile, FVWM, etc.? So my answer to that is, anybody can create their own spins of Ubuntu, right? There's some great examples of that. There's official flavors, and there are unofficial community remixes of various things. There's a Ubuntu Unity remix now, which is looking really cool. Anybody can create one of these things. So if you have the itch to create something like that, other people might enjoy it. And there's nothing to say it can't become an official flavor at some point, right? If you put the effort in it and you're really maintaining it over time, this could potentially become a real flavor if you want to. But it's really up to you. So this is where the community is really empowered to create these sorts of things. And I think flavors are a really great example of how Ubuntu community really brings people together. So if you have the itch for something like this, create it. It'd be great. Let's go to the next question. Same poster, Dyson Hoover asked, will Canonical ever release a version of Ubuntu with a rolling release package model? So this has been a long-standing debate. People have always asked for rolling releases. There's it's a real culture, a whole culture behind rolling versus a stable release model. So long before I worked on Ubuntu, before I worked at Canonical, I actually created a distro myself, Foresight Linux, that was based on a rolling model. And it was cool. It was fun to work on. It's very difficult to maintain. And it's really difficult to also build products based on that. We have talked about it with Ubuntu, within Ubuntu over the years. But I think really we're trying to build build an operating system that is a building block for others to create products with, right? So Ubuntu Desktop isn't just a product of its own. It's something where other flavors can create their own spins of Ubuntu. We have, OEMs that ship hardware pre-installed that want, certain tweaks, things like that, certain a fair bit of predictability and reliability. So it's kind of hard to deliver both. So I don't see a rolling release really in our future, but who knows what could happen. But hopefully that answers your question. Let's go to another one here. Lainey, this one I think is for you. Bartik DX on Ubuntu Hideout asked, will Ubuntu ever have better Nvidia driver support?
Yeah. So the question doesn't completely say what the questioner thinks the problem is. So I guess I'll have to just answer like a bit generally. Maybe if you're watching, you can possibly expand in the comments, and we can probably come back to this later, perhaps. So we have been improving Nvidia support in recent releases. So for example, I think since 2004, although that could be wrong. Don't take that. Take that with a pinch of salt. We have now the Nvidia drivers signed by Canonical on the Ubuntu downloads, which means that you no longer have to previous releases you had to kind of type a password and enroll a secure boot password to use the Nvidia drivers. Now they're signed by Canonical. That means you don't have to do that anymore. And we tried to bring new versions of the Nvidia drivers back to the currently supported LTS releases as they come out. So we are trying to have the greatest hardware coverage that we can with the drivers that we're given by Nvidia. Obviously, those are proprietary drivers, so we don't have the ability to fix problems within them ourselves. We rely on the vendor to do that. And this machine I'm talking to you through now is an Nvidia machine, and I don't have particular problems with it myself. The only thing that I miss, which I believe is going to be fixed upstream, is that I can't run the Wayland session on this, so I still have to be running Xorg on this particular desktop. But as I understand it, that's scheduled to be fixed later this year, so hopefully even that problem will go away. But yeah, like I say, if you have a more specific difficulty, please ask that in the chat if you're here, and I'll do my best to answer that later. Okay, thank you. I've got another one from Andrew Hazen that I'll take. Is there an immutable Ubuntu desktop in the future? Would it support safe deterministic package layering in the base image for adding custom system packages like Fedora and Silverblue? So we are working on an Ubuntu Core based desktop. It's currently a prototype. We haven't been working on it all that long, but we've made really good progress. It's basically, of course, it's based on Ubuntu Core, but we're building it in such a way that you can build other products out of it, right? So we're building it in pieces so you can replace, like, for example, your entire desktop environment by a different snap. So your basic desktop environment could be packaged, what we're calling the Ubuntu Desktop Session snap. Will provide the things you need to run the Ubuntu defaults, Gnome shell with our set of default settings, that sort of thing. But a flavor like Mate could create their own Mate desktop session snap and just drop that in and build their own images and have a Mate environment, right? So it doesn't let you, it's not quite layering like what Silverblue is doing, but it's similar considering that we're building these different pieces that you could just replace. Which brings me to a related question. Let me bring it up here. So from the Ubuntu Hideout Discord channel, let me hide this. Callum asked, is there any chance that Ubuntu would have somewhat of a stabler testing build in the future, such as having testing repos that can be enabled like Fedora, so that someone could easily test new software versions such as GNOME 40, KDE 521, without having to switch to a testing build? So our work on Core Desktop, could potentially fit that need, right? We could have
the latest version of Gnome built in a separate channel for the snap, and you could just replace your desktop session with the version from this maybe a GNOME 42 channel or something like that if you're testing GNOME 42. You still have your stable base, and everything you need to have your system running could be nice and stable, reliable, works with your hardware, and just replace your desktop environment with something a little bit more bleeding edge to try things out. And if you decide you don't want to keep it, you can just switch back to the stable channel. Same could be true for KDE, things like that. So we could potentially deliver something like this based on core desktop. But that's still to kind of be determined. We're still working on that. But I think that model could fit that need. Let's go on to a different question. Ali Wilson asked, the mention of AD join I'd install is great. I don't think even Windows can do that. I'm not sure if it can. There was a mention of group policy client as well. Does this mean you're not using SSSD or realmd? I'm not actually sure. I'm not all that familiar with the technical implementation there, but for group policy client, we're using something we created called ADSys, which Jean-Baptiste and Didier have been working on. I don't know a lot of the details about the technical implementation there, but essentially the client, gets the group policy from Active Directory and applies it to the host. I don't think it's necessarily reliant on these other pieces. Does anybody else know more about that? No? You can look it up. It's on GitHub, ADSys, under the Ubuntu organization on GitHub. All right. There's another one here. Marco, do you see the question on Cosmic? So given that GNOME is not focused on a desktop experience, is there any plans for some sort of fork like Cosmic from Pop! OS? I don't know if I would really say that's true, that GNOME's not focused on a desktop experience, but could you maybe comment, Marco, on any plans that what Pop! OS is doing with Cosmic and how that differs from what we're doing?
Yeah, no, I didn't see the question, but yeah, we. Okay, yeah. Well, as a GNOME, I think we do. I mean, we do focus on users, and actually, the design team at GNOME is really committed into getting the best experience for users, and especially for GNOME 40, there have been lots of user testing going on. There have been, checking on multiple groups of users, doing, for example, familiar with Linux, or unfamiliar with Linux, or users of GNOME, other distros. So there have been some study on that, and so of course, tastes are very different, and in all the kinds of things not everybody might appreciate some design decisions, but what it matters and what also Ubuntu wants is a consistent experience more than provide an experience that can be the right one for everybody. By the way, speaking of different forks of GNOME or other kinds of desktop which are going away from GNOME upstream, we definitely don't want to take that road. We try we do have some specific changes on GNOME, which are eventually just related to 3 extensions, which are also maintained by the community. So we try the most we can to stick closer to default GNOME experience, and don't see us leaving that way. Actually, the only thing we can do is try to bring our ideas upstream and try to get them implemented for everybody, but not really just to take another road at this point.
Great, thanks, Marco. So while we're on that topic, George Castro asked on Discourse, what's the future of the Ubuntu dock in a GNOME 40 world? Marco, you want to take that?
So yeah, the point is that the current design might still work with the GNOME 40. Actually there is some upstream efforts to make it work there, and it kind of work. So we might use that in to preserve the current experience. I mean, it would basically just hide the default dock and use that dock as we know. Although we ideally there was some discussion with the GNOME design team in order to bring some kind of dock experience upstream. So let's try to also there is some other vendors which are interested on that. So let's try to get that in case, and this continue the discussion to have something which might be upstreamed. But otherwise, the design will basically keep the one we have so far in the meantime.
Great, thanks, Marco. Another question that I'll take was kind of a combination of questions from multiple people, but some people asked about GNOME 40, not just from Dash to Doc's point of view or the Ubuntu dock, but so 2104, many people noticed, did not include GNOME 40. This was simply because it was a big change that was coming late in our development cycle. We didn't want to push out something that we didn't feel was ready. It wasn't because GNOME 40 wasn't necessarily ready, but getting all the changes that we needed to get into to continue providing the experience that we already provide would have been risky. It was late in the development cycle. So we stuck with the latest GNOME 338 stable point release. We will definitely be going to GNOME 40-ish for 2110. I'm sure it'll be GNOME 41. We haven't really, talked about the exact version, but it'll be the latest GNOME. I'd imagine we'd go to that in 2110, just so we're ready for 2204. We generally do prefer to take the riskier changes during these interim releases. However, GNOME 40 was a big change, so we decided it would be prudent to push that off for our next release. So now we have an entire development cycle to continue to stabilize that and provide the great experience that our users expect. Let's see. So, question on the new desktop installer. Andrew Hazen asked, how's the new Flutter desktop installer going? Is it likely to be used in 2110, or is development going to take a few cycles? Development is definitely going to take a couple cycles for sure. It's a big undertaking. For those that might not be aware of our plans, we've talked about it on Discourse a fair bit. Our existing installer, which has been great, it's served us really well, is very old, and it has dependencies on some pretty old dependencies that aren't really maintained anymore. So we do kind of need to move on to something a little bit more modern. And with our investment in Flutter, we decided it was a great opportunity to write a new installer in Flutter. That's the graphical portion of the installer is in Flutter. Part of our design is to reuse various components that we've already been developing. So Subiquity is the server installer today. We're working with the Subiquity team to make that provide a proper backend API that the UI can drive. So the desktop installer will be Subiquity with a Flutter-based user interface that drives Subiquity. So this gives us the advantage of reusing that existing code in Subiquity, the existing test infrastructure, all that kind of stuff. But it's a huge undertaking. Subiquity doesn't do everything we need it to do for desktop. There's a lot of things that server doesn't need to consider that desktop does. So we're working on it. We're making great progress. Our hope is we will have ISOs for people to use. I don't know if they'll be the default ISOs or an alternate ISO for 2110, but we are planning to have ISOs that users can download and install using the new installer. It probably won't be completely feature complete, but hopefully it'll at least meet the 80% use case, the most common use cases. So we'll see where we're at as we get a little bit closer to 2110 release date to see if we can really provide that. But we'd love to get more testing and more community feedback on that. So thanks for that question. Georges, since you're talking about Gnome, what kind of relationship with the Gnome community does the desktop team want to have? Yeah, we've talked about this in the past. We definitely want a great, thriving relationship with upstream Gnome, and we plan to continue to participate in Gnome development. Hopefully we can provide some needed resources there. We're happy to help wherever we can. So do you have any more specific examples of things you'd like answered there? Feel free to let me know. Let's go to another question from Discord. Daniel on Discord asked, who selects new software to include in the stacks? For example, NF tables, NetPlan, Pulse Audio, and ultimately, how is the decision made? So this is kind of a tricky question. Like some of the stuff that was included in the question actually are things that are provided by our foundations team. The desktop team doesn't necessarily pick those components. The foundations team provides the basic foundations that desktop and server and cloud, all these other images build from. So we don't really get involved with, like, for example, NF tables, as far as the desktop team, we're not really picking that kind of thing. Pulse Audio, we definitely have a say in. But for a more general answer, how we choose what gets included, we generally talk about it as a team. We kind of weigh the pros and cons. Using Pulse Audio versus Pipewire right now as an example. We'll have a discussion. We'll get, make sure the Pipewire packages have all the features that we need enabled. We'll all install it and test it, try it out, see if it meets our needs, what might need to be fixed before we make a switch to it. And then we'll kind of weigh, is this the right time to make that switch? And we'll have that discussion as a team. And we do this with all of these sorts of things when we want to look at switching packages. Remember, I have very fond memories of the UDSs, Ubuntu Developer Summits. In the past, we always had a session every UDS where we talked about the default packages to install, and there was always great debate about Rhythmbox versus Banshee and basically things like that. And there were always pros and cons to both, and we all had our opinions there. But we used to have a lot of fun having those discussions, and I'd kind of like to bring some of those discussions just to Discourse. If people have suggestions like, hey, there's this great new app that might be a better choice than Rhythmbox for our default music player, raise it on Discourse and we can have that discussion on Discourse. Sadly, we're not doing UDSs right now. So we can't have those face-to-face discussions, but Discourse is a great place to have those discussions. So I would definitely welcome those kinds of things so we can get the community more involved in those discussions. Let's see. There's another question from Roly Buttbug on Discord. Sorry. What do you think of Ubuntu Mate? So I mentioned earlier flavors, how important I think they are to the Ubuntu community and really what brings the Ubuntu community together. I think Mate is a really great example of flavors. It's really a thriving flavor. They have great contributors. Of course, Martin Wimpress, great friend of mine, former fearless leader of the desktop team, Ubuntu Mate. He's super active, does awesome work. Ubuntu Mate is always a stellar example of an Ubuntu flavor. And again, with flavors, I would encourage anybody to get involved. Help out your favorite flavor. If GNOME's not your favorite desktop, maybe you like Mate, maybe you like LXDE. We have a bunch of flavors. Jump in there, help those out, get involved, or create your own. So again, Ubuntu Mate, I love it. So another one, this one's for you, Lainey. What's the difference between Ubuntu and Debian from Ray6Y?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, it's a big question, so
yeah.
I'll give a few. But yeah. So one of the main differences is the nature of how we do releases. So in Ubuntu, most of you probably know that we release every 6 months. So you already know years and years in advance when each Ubuntu release is going to happen. It's going to be April and October every year. But for Debian, that's not the case. So Debian is more like the slogan over there is kind of like we release when we're ready, kind of thing. So what will happen is Debian will they'll sort of decide to stop accepting new updates at some point, and then they'll go through a period of like stabilizing the release, so looking at all of the bugs that have been filed and kind of reducing those down. So there's no critical bugs left, so that all the packages are in shape, and that takes as long as it takes, right? If maintainers are busy or they don't have time or the bugs are particularly hard, then it will take longer. If there's not many bugs, then it will take less time. So like the release model that we have is kind of different. Debian's one is kind of more akin to Ubuntu's LTSs, although still not entirely, because our LTSs are still time-based, right? And one of the other big ones is the way that maintenance works in the two distributions. So in Debian, each package will have like a specific named maintainer. So that can either be a team, which is a group of people. So that's what we do for all of the GNOME packages. We have the GNOME team. And that's, some of us from Canonical, from Ubuntu, and some people not from Canonical, and some people from Endless as well come and join us and help maintain the packages at Debian. And all of the team kind of gets together and does that. But in Ubuntu, we don't have maintainers. So in Ubuntu, everybody maintains all of the packages, which is kind of great because, it means it's easier if somebody wants to make a change that affects like a broad section of the distribution. It's a bit easier to do that in Ubuntu than Debian. But it also can have some downsides in that if nobody owns a package, then sometimes there can be no clear person to go to if there's a problem, and it can mean sometimes that there's cracks which problems can fall in between. So it's kind of why it's really great that Ubuntu is based on Debian, because we kind of get a lot of, obviously we get a lot of the work that the Debian maintainers do flowing into Ubuntu just because of the nature of our release cycle. So, they are quite different, but I think kind of deliberately work, kind of locked together in the way they work. And a lot of us, especially on the desktop team and many other teams at Canonical, we do a lot of our work as much as we can really in Debian, so that, we benefit from the maintenance there and our work. Even people who aren't using Ubuntu, if they're using Debian or any Debian derivative, are benefiting from the work that Canonical is supporting us as engineers in doing as well a lot of the time, which I think is really great.
Okay, yeah, thanks. It's quite a complicated question to answer there with the difference between Debian and Ubuntu. Debian's really been a great base for Ubuntu to be based on. So there's several related questions here. I will try to just tackle them as a group. There were a few questions related to GNOME software and the Snap Store, and if we have any plans to create a new one, perhaps written in Flutter. We don't have a plan right now. We're pretty excited about the current work. GNOME software has recently seen some design refreshes. We haven't updated our fork of GNOME software, which we're calling Snap Store, yet to be based on the latest GNOME software, but we're looking forward to doing that. Like I said, we don't have a current plan to do this. It has been a bit of a pain point. GNOME software, it does a lot of things which can make it a bit complicated. So having the long-running process has been a little bit painful. Trying to deliver the experience we wanted to deliver for snaps and what's presented from the store doesn't necessarily fit very well with the GNOME software model. But again, we don't really want to recreate that. We'd rather work to just deliver a great experience to the user. So whatever that ends up being. So for this cycle, for 2110, we're planning on rebasing our fork for Snap Store on the latest Gnome redesigns, which look very promising. So hopefully we'll see some nice changes there. There was another question is kind of related, asking for a Focus Driver Manager firmware update tool. So I don't really have a plan for that. Right now it is bundled into the Snap Store in Gnome software. If I recall correctly, the proposed design changes in Gnome software did include splitting that out. I haven't actually looked at that lately, but I would very much be in favor of that actually being in a separate tool. I think from a maintenance point of view, it would be easier to maintain that as a separate focus tool as opposed to being bundled in Gnome software or Snap Store. So I'd like to see that happen as well. Another question was, let's see if I can actually find this here so I can just show it on screen. No. Okay, so somebody asked if there's any plans for a menu while installation to have a vanilla GNOME desktop installed. This brings back memories. I think it was Karmic, if I remember correctly. We had a desktop session that we shipped. Lainey, do you remember what this was called? It was like it was a German word.
No, yes, I do, but I don't want to say it. It's an Italian word.
Italian word, okay.
It was stracciatella.
Okay.
How did I do?
Marco, how was he? Did you get that right?
Sort of stracciatella.
Okay, so we can't do that justice. I'm sorry, we just can't.
Sorry to any Italians listening.
Yeah, so back then, this was GNOME 2 days. We did ship a desktop session that was focused on providing a vanilla GNOME experience. I'm not really sure when that went away. I guess we probably dropped that when we switched to Unity, and of course, it wouldn't have applied with GNOME 3 anyway. I mean, it would have had to be completely reworked. But that was a fun thing that we used to do. Yeah, we haven't talked about that lately, really. We'll see. Can't say we won't do it for that.
Let me give a bit of a extra on that. So
sure.
We do have in Ubuntu now a package called Gnome-Session, which is kind of intended to be similar to that idea that we had back then. When we first switched to GNOME, we introduced a feature, or we contributed upstream to glib, which was to allow a lot of the customizations that we apply on the Ubuntu session to apply only to that Ubuntu session. So lots of settings defaults that we change in Ubuntu, of course. What you can do is you can install this package Gnome-Session, and you get the kind of closest to a vanilla GNOME upstream session as we can provide now. So it's sort of a similar idea to what we had with that Italian word back then. So I mean, people, yeah, it's actually what I'm running here on this desktop right now. So people feel free to go and try that out and have a look. So you don't get the kind of Ubuntu dock and stuff. You don't get the theme. You get the upstream Adwaita theme, all of that. So yeah, a similar idea kind of lives on in Ubuntu. And we try to make our customizations only apply to Ubuntu itself now, as much as we can.
Okay, cool. Let's go on to, there was a question on Flutter. What happens if Google abandons Flutter, as they have done with multiple projects in the past? Well, sure. Google has done this quite a few times in the past. Although I think Flutter has, of course, it's an open source project that can continue to live on, right? Even if Google drops it. But really, it's thriving. There are so many Flutter-based applications out there, particularly on Android. There are a ludicrous amount of apps in the Android Play Store that are written in Flutter. I can't imagine they're going to drop that. Also, and I'm not very, all that privy on plans for Fuchsia and things, but I have to imagine that Flutter is an important part of their Fuchsia story, which Fuchsia might end up being something that never really gets released. Who knows? But I think Flutter will live on. It's a a great toolkit. It's super modern. Yeah, we're quite happy with it, and we have continued plans to continue to improve that for desktop. Let's see, let's move on to something else. This is an interesting one. So any regrets moving from Unity to Gnome? I would say no. I mean, I loved Unity 7. There was a lot of things I really liked about it, but it's a ton of work maintaining a full desktop environment yourself, right? I mean, I would much rather be part of a larger project that's delivering this that everybody can benefit from, which requires less work by us to maintain it, essentially, right? I mean, as opposed to taking on the burden of an entire desktop shell and all the bits and pieces that go along with that. That's a lot of work, and I'd rather focus on other things. So I'm quite happy with the move to Gnome. Yeah, as many of you know, I've been involved with Gnome for 20 years now, approaching 20 years. So it's nice to be back with Gnome, but I will admit there are things in Unity that I miss. But I think it was the right move to move back to Gnome and focus on delivering the experience to the users that they really deserve. Let's see. Let's go back to a question that we got on Discourse, or I'm sorry, Discord. Daniel on Discord asked, what is your favorite feature in Ubuntu Desktop and why? Let's see if anybody, who wants to answer that? Heather, do you have any opinions?
My favorite feature in Ubuntu is, I don't know, that I don't have to install sudo on a fresh install.
Anybody else have favorites they want to mention?
I actually like the GNOME shell overview. I think it's really cool. I recently had the chance to get my hands on a MacBook, and I was actually impressed that actually the design of the GNOME shell overview is actually a bit better than the in my opinion, than the macOS overview, because everything is bundled in this single view. I like this. And I miss it when I work on that Mac. I'm always confused in which view I am. Yeah.
Cool. All right. Let's move on to one. This isn't a community question. This is a question from me. Frederick, you have, can you talk a little bit about what your plans are in Yaru for 2110? Or are you even thinking further along like 2204?
We just needed to process all those little changes we made currently. So our main focus is actually stability and that nothing breaks. So this is the main focus every time we make a change. But eventually improving the dark theme a little bit more, because we are happy with a palette change, because everything is a little bit more darker. But I think especially in the applications, the buttons miss a little bit of contrast now, because those SCSS functions we use are not linear. So yeah, that is a little bit too technical now, but yeah, but we plan to improve it rather than change anything. We have some nice GitHub actions which always pull the changes from upstream, so we don't miss anything they change. Because if we would miss any change, it could eventually make a little mistake in the applications or something. So yeah, we prepared and we don't plan anything, I think, to change, just to improve it.
Okay, cool. There's another question actually here, probably for you. Any plans for a Yaru theme for Qt applications? Have you guys ever thought about that, or has anybody mentioned that?
Yeah, we the problem is that we don't know how we can make that. So of course it would be interesting, but talking about me, I have no idea how this works. So I think most stuff is not CSS, so I'm already out. But maybe we have some great new contributors to Yaru, which so maybe he can do it. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. So maybe, maybe we can get some contributors to help out there. It would be great. Here's one, another one from Discord. I think this is probably best for, well, I don't know. Lainey, you want to try taking this? What's your opinion of Rust being used in the Linux kernel?
Yeah, I'm not a big expert on this. We're not big kind of super low level people on this team. So I have played with Rust myself a bit, and like being someone who does use C sometimes, I certainly appreciate the language, and the ability to write safe systems code I think is great. And when you phrase it like that, it makes Rust sound like a really good choice for the Linux kernel, doesn't it? But I mean, not being a kernel developer, I don't want to express a very definitive opinion on that, because I don't want to get flamed in the comments. But I know that some people have, there's various proposals to bring Rust into the Linux kernel, isn't there? And they've been reviewed by the kernel's, kind of the leadership of that project. And I think there was some specific concerns around things like, not like the error behavior if memory allocations fail and things like that. Obviously, you can't crash if that happens inside the kernel. That's just not an option. So I know there was some very specific technical concerns, and that community are looking into it. And so, yeah, wish them the best of luck. And if anything can help us write more secure and bug-free code, then all for that.
Cool. All right, I got a WSL2 question here. This is great. So yeah, WSL2, the GUI support is coming. It's available in the Windows preview, or what do they call it? Insiders. I'm not all that up to date on Microsoft's terminology on stuff, but this was recently announced. But basically, they provide the ability now to run GUI apps. We were able to do this before, but it required various tweaks and installing like a third-party X server from the Microsoft Store. So now they're kind of integrating all that work to make it easy. You won't be able to install like a full Ubuntu desktop environment easily and just run like Gnome inside of WSL. That would be very difficult. However, what is really cool is you could install, say, gedit, if you love gedit, in your WSL container, and get a start menu launcher for gedit and run it natively, and it just looks like another Windows app, although it looks like Ubuntu, because it is Ubuntu. So I think that's pretty cool. I mean, that could be LibreOffice. It could be some debugger, like you're doing some Linux development and you need to use Valgrind to do some profiling or something, right? So maybe your app isn't a graphical app that you're developing, and you're doing your development on Windows in WSL targeting Linux. You could just fire up Valgrind and profile your app using a nice a GUI. So yeah, there's some great potential there, and it's exciting to see some of the stuff that Microsoft's enabling now. It's pretty cool. Their little demo video I thought was pretty neat, where they showed Microsoft Edge running on Ubuntu in WSL, and it shows you the little penguin icon over top the Edge, so you can distinguish which one is the Windows Microsoft Edge and which one's the Linux Microsoft Edge. I think it's pretty great to see how well they're embracing coming to Linux. Let's find another question. There's another one for you, Lainey, from Callum on Discord. How do you decide what to release on LTS updates? Do you only release bug fixes and updates, such as 2004.1, or do you release new package versions or features with those updates too?
Yep. So we try to identify the bugs which impact most people, obviously, and fix those first. So, for example, data loss bugs, or really common crash bugs. We have something called the Ubuntu Error Tracker, which anyone can see on errors.ubuntu.com if they want to go to that, which is one source of one source of data which we use to decide which bugs to prioritize, which finds crash bugs there. In terms of features, we don't tend to generally introduce features. The one big exception for that, arguably, a feature is, as I mentioned earlier, hardware enablement. So, for example, new versions of kernels or new versions of drivers, we will tend to introduce into LTSs if they allow people to, install and use Ubuntu properly on their new laptops that have come out. And the other thing that we do try to do, but sometimes this ends up kind of lagging a bit, and we want to do better on this as a team, is follow the point release updates of our upstream projects that we depend upon. So that's like Gnome regularly releases bug fix updates to its stable releases every few weeks after the stable release comes out. We do try to update those in our stables as well. Like I say, not as systematically as we might like to be, but that's something that we do try and strive to do. So that's another way that we know, another source of stable updates that we can find. And we actually have a special kind of route through our stable update process for Gnome updates, because the team that manages those, the stable release management team in Ubuntu, have previously recognized the quality assurance and placed trust in Gnome upstreams processes for deciding what to include in those stable updates. So usually every individual bug fix has to be explicitly verified for a stable update to go out, which is kind of a very conservative position for the distro to be in. But for Gnome, the policy is a bit different, and it says, well, no, we trust that upstream has validated those. So all you need to do is push the update out and kind of generally, exercise the application a bit, but you don't need to specifically verify that it fixes what it claims to fix, because we trust the QA that the Gnome project puts into that. So that's kind of another big source of updates for us.
Okay, let's see. Go to another question. We're almost out of time for questions here. Luna asked Gnome 40 or 41 for 2110. I suspect it'll be Gnome 41, but that's to be decided still. This is a funny one. Can you add HUD function in the future? I'm assuming you're referring to the HUD feature we had in Unity. That was actually one of my favorite features in Unity, and I've tried to introduce the idea to the GNOME designers in the past, and they weren't terribly keen on it. But for those that aren't aware, the HUD was a really cool feature where you could just, I think it was a double tap of the Alt key maybe, would raise just a little box in the middle of the screen where you could type, and it would search all kinds of things. But the coolest thing was, like, say you're using Inkscape or GIMP that has tons of nested menus, and you couldn't remember which menu had the item you were looking for in it. If that app was focused and you started typing the name of what you wanted, it would take you right to that app. That it would pre-populate the little nested tree to where that menu item was, and you could just click enter and it would activate it. It was so cool. I really miss that feature. I would love to see that come back to GNOME, but sadly it's not there. So we're actually about out of time. Let's wrap this up a little bit here. Anybody have any last words they want to say to everybody while we're still online?
I just want to say thanks to everybody for coming and celebrating the release with us, and I hope that you all will come back for the next Indaba.
What's the specific item you're looking to purchase?
Great. Yeah, so that's, as far as future Indabas, we haven't decided what kind of a schedule we're going to do these sorts of things. Hopefully people found this useful and interesting. We will try to decide if we're going to want to do this once a month or whatever. We need to talk about that a little bit, and we would welcome feedback on the Discourse post. Tell us what you liked, what you didn't like, if you want a different format, whatever. feedback is very welcome. Please go to Discourse and let us know what you thought. Thank you very much for your time, and have a great day. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye,